Howdy and welcome back to the workshop. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite subjects, junk. I absolutely love old junk, mainly things that I don't think are junk. It's one of the one man's trash is another man's treasure type situation. I love going into antique stores and finding old tools. I use a lot of the tools that I found in various parts of the country in antique stores in my everyday work in the shop, and I want to talk to you about 5 of my absolute favorites. Now, not all of these came from antique stores, but they are all very, very old. The reason why I think that these tools are so cool is because they have a really awesome history behind them. None of them are new, none of them are made today, but they're still incredibly functional, and the methods that they were made with are very impressive and I think super interesting. We're gonna interrupt really quick because while buying tools is great for your mental health, it's not the only thing that's good for your mental health. Today's video sponsor, BetterHelp, is a great tool and resource to help connect you with a therapist that could probably help you even more than buying old junk. The last couple years have been kind of hard on everyone with the pandemic and the isolation and just the way that the world is going. The focus on community and being able to connect with other people becomes harder and harder as everything becomes more digitalized. This, however, is a pretty awesome way to be able to use the digitalization and technology that we have available in order to connect with a therapist that makes sense for you. Therapists are a lot like dating. If you don't connect with the person, it's just not going to work out so good. So to be able to have the ability to go through and answer questions about what you're going through, what you're like personally, that gives you the ability to connect even faster with a therapist that's gonna work out better for you. Now for me, I wouldn't even consider seeing a counselor or a therapist who didn't share my same faith because that's what my whole worldview is based off of, and that's something that BetterHelp has taken into account. They have therapists of different faiths to be able to connect with you, and that way you're able to connect and speak with someone who shares your same worldview, which is incredibly important. Now there's different ways that you can connect with each therapist, whether it's texting, video calls, and you work it out so that it works for your schedule. That means you're not stuck trying to work the things in your life around your therapy. You can fit it in wherever it works best for you. Talking and human connection is so important, which is why I'm very excited and thankful for BetterHelp. So if you guys are struggling with something and you need to talk, you can go to betterhelp.com/Will Stelter for 10% off your first month of therapy with a licensed professional. Thank you, BetterHelp, for sponsoring today's episode. With that, let's keep on talking about old tools. Let's start off with the first tool that I picked up that I'm going to talk about today, and that is this little pair of dividers. Now, probably pretty much anyone with a blacksmith shop or a machine shop or a metalworking shop of any sort has a pair of dividers. They're still made today, but they're not made like this anymore. These were, I believe, forged. It would be pretty hard to make it any other way, and because of their age, that's another reason why I'm pretty sure that they are forged. It's a really interesting design because rather than having a separate spring, the whole thing is made from a single piece with your 2 long limbs coming out, a forged spring in there, and then a cute little wing nut with a little bronze washer that allows you to open it up nice and wide. I use these all the time, laying out my handle material on handle blocks, scribing lines, and then looking at and playing with them because these things are super fun. You can pinch them down and spin that little wing nut. They're a fun little fidget toy for those of us who are ADHD in the metalworking world. There's no maker's mark on them, so it's hard to tell exactly when or where they were made, but based off of just the progression of manufacturing, I'm pretty certain that they're around the turn of the century. This was made during an era of tools where they didn't cut corners like they do today. Things are pretty purely utilitarian when you buy a new manufactured tool. If you go to the hardware store, things aren't made to be aesthetically pleasing as much as they were back then. They added some unnecessarily nice lines in here. There's some slight facets. The spring on the top has a facet that runs around. It's just a bunch of little details that really make this set of dividers a cool piece. The next one that I got is a little vise here. And a lot of you guys know I really like bench vices. I really like big ones, and I really like these tiny little baby vices. This vise was made by Athol Manufacturing. They were one of the leaders in vice manufacturing. They're based out of Athol, Massachusetts. They were later on purchased by Starrett, which most of you in the metalworking world will recognize that name. And this vise right here is a number 0. It's a little clamp-on vise. You got a little screw on the bottom there. You can clamp it onto a bench top or something like that. And it's a quick release. And so unlike a normal vise that has a full vise nut right there, this has a half nut that allows you to pick up the front jaw of the vise and slide it in and out. Not that it takes a terribly long time to do the full travel on this. It's just a really neat little feature. It's cool to be able to see the machining marks on the slide. It was definitely cut with a shaper, a single point tool cutter, and the patent date on it is November 14, 1871. So I'm not quite sure when they quit manufacturing these, but it's very safe to say that this is a very, very, very old vise. It's in surprisingly good condition. I found this one online. It's not something that I found local, but this is the sort of thing that I really look out for every time I'm going around in antique stores. Oftentimes you see the little vices like this that have an open screw, but the covered slide ones are the ones that I'm always after, just because I think that they are overall a lot cooler. So I don't really honestly use this one all that often. It's mostly just a little bit of eye candy. It just has really nice lines to it. Athol has some of my favorite lines in all of vice making. The way that they incorporate and flow the different facets into each other, I think, is very aesthetically pleasing. Again, this is from that same era of tools where the way that something looked was really important. And they took a lot of pride in building really nice looking tools. So we'll move on to the next one, which is another kind of vise, but it's a little bit different. This is a hand vise. This is a little bit different style. This is the first hand vise that I ever bought, and it is it's almost like a post vise in the way that it opens up and closes. It pivots down at the bottom, but that means that it doesn't clamp square on things. And so I found that while I thought it was cool, looks nice, it's well made, I ended up not using it very much. And it was a couple years after I bought that one before I found this guy. And it actually has another piece that threads in there that allows you to lock it into another vise, which is a cool little feature. But this guy has a right-hand thread on this side and a left-hand thread on this side, and so those jaws open together and close together. And so it's always going to be centered. It's got a couple of neat little features, like a little bit of a square indent in the center of the jaws. That allows me to hold pins and little bolts and things like that. And so I found this thing to be massively helpful because I can hold small parts very tightly. It's really nice for filing on them, for things that are too small to clamp in the vise if you need to be able to move them around or something like that. Or if I need to take it to the grinder, anything that's small and metal, if you touch it on the grinder, it will heat up and burn your hands. And this really stops that from happening, which is very, very nice. A couple of the features of this vise is that it is nickel plated. It has a nice rosewood handle, which is very common for, again, kind of like that turn of the century time period. But something that's kind of special about this one is that it actually has a secret compartment in the handle, and it has all of the original little tools that would have come with it, which is a lot. And all those little tools fit in here in different ways. This right here is kind of an awl, and so you can punch through, open up holes in leather working. There's different cutters and different shaped bits. Very, very interesting piece of history. So this has been a massively handy little tool to have. Just being able to hold on to small things is a great capability to have in a shop where I make lots of things that have small parts. I do think it's super neat also that thread is definitely like hand filed in there. It's pretty wild that they were able to make that work out, and it looks very complete. The next one that I want to talk about is something that I found in an antique store here in Bozeman, and I eyed over it for a long time. They had a fairly high price on it, but finally the antique store was going out of business, and I decided to pull the trigger. And it is one of the coolest things that I have ever found. It is this little Stanley folding ruler. It's German silver with ivory inlays. The reason why I know exactly who the make is on this is because I have a hardware store catalog from the early 1900s that has these in it. So this thing is kind of worn out. A lot of the numbers on the open side are kind of disappearing. They've been worn away. But on the inside, all of those lines are nice and crisp. It again has a neat little hidden feature, and that is that the very end of it opens up and acts as a caliper, essentially. You can go and check and see how wide something is by hooking the end and then tightening it down. And oh, look at that, 5/8 of an inch wide. So that's a cool little feature that they incorporated in there. Everything works very smoothly on this. The ivory is cracked a little bit in certain places, but it's not too bad. It's still a very complete unit. It's very small. It fits in the hand very nicely. They did some interesting stuff with the hinges and whatnot to make it look a little bit nicer. And it's just so cool to have a piece again, from that same era where they really, really cared about the way that things looked. So it's very functional and it's very aesthetically pleasing at the same time. So I absolutely love this. It's very fun to play with. It's a cool little piece of history. The last piece that I want to talk about is this pair of pliers right here. Now, this pair of pliers is, I'm not quite sure exactly why they were made. They seem to me like they're a specialty pair of pliers. They have a locking ring that allows you to clamp down on something and hold it due to that little ring on there. And these are really, really cool because from what I can tell, and just based on my knowledge of tools from that era, I think these are from about the mid to late 1800s. They're definitely hand forged and hand filed, which is amazing because they are in just spectacular condition. There's a very interestingly fit dovetailed spring in the back there, and that's what makes those open up. It was another one that has very interesting lines carved into it. Again, mostly aesthetic, just the way that they did different facets and kind of some interesting file work in the jaw area, as well as on the end of it. It does have some stamping, but I'm not quite sure what it says. It's kind of double stamped, and so it's kind of hard to read. There's some hand-filed knurling in the jaw area, and then there's that relieved area. That relieved area is why I believe that these are specialty made. I was talking with my friend Ben Snur about it, and he suggested that maybe they were like a watchmaker's or a jeweler's tool, something that might have been made for holding a specific item, but it's really hard to say. They're so old that I think it's going to be really hard to find any information about them. But these are really, really neat, the way that they were forged and fit together. As far as I understand it, I've never made them myself, but basically they forge out the one side, they punch a hole in the middle of this boss area right here, and then they forge the other side and drop it through and then forge it back shut, which pretty dang hard to do, especially to make it look clean. And these have very, very, I mean, it's not perfectly tight, but it's very, very well done. It's not a big gap in there at all. And it's a very strong method of construction, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. I really like these pliers. I'm not quite sure what I'll use them for, but they're an interesting little piece of history. It's cool to see all of the file marks still on it in certain areas, like on the spring and in the jaws. I think this will be one that I might have to try and recreate down the line for the channel. So those are kind of my favorite super old tools that I use just about every day in the shop. There are a bunch of other things that I always look for when I'm out at antique stores. I always like to find this style of wrench. They're super handy, they're nice and thin, and which is quite nifty when you're working on a lot of old machines. Sometimes you don't have a ton of bolt clearance. I like to find old hammers. All of these are old forged hammers. This one was filed, probably a jeweler's hammer. And then these two both have the forged scale loft on them. I found this one in Montana. I found this one in Texas. I love to find old machinist tools. These squares and adjustable squares and whatnot are super nifty to have kicking around the shop. And then this was something that, not something that I will ever use, but a very interesting piece of forging. It's constructed of 1, 2, 3, at least, maybe 4 pieces of steel forged welded together to make this big round bladed adze. So I thought that was super interesting. There's all sorts of other fun things that I always like to look out for at antique stores, tongs and other fun little bits of history that I get to bring back into the shop and bring back to life, put them back to work, or just have them sit on the shelf to use them for inspiration. An important thing to remember is if you guys are going out looking for cool old tools and you do try to clean them up, be very gentle. Don't use abrasives on them. Use something like a Vaporust if it's rusty, or if it's something like this, maybe use a wire wheel, but never use a flap disc to clean up old stuff. You will wreck it. You want to be very gentle with it, and most of the time, leaving patina is going to be the best way to preserve both the value of it and the heritage and the story of what has happened to that tool. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you like old junk, make sure to like and subscribe. Drop a comment down below about your coolest old tool find. And thank you to BetterHelp for sponsoring today's episode. Thank you to our patrons for patronizing us, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.